Jeremy, congratulations on being recognised as the Inspired Leader of 2015 by the Performance Theatre. We've talked a lot here about followers and leaders. Is that the way you see the world?
Well, I think the world is changing. So the binary between followers and leaders is becoming increasingly odd. Young people see themselves as participants in everything, right? They make media and content, they're making and contributing to the huge increase in political protest in the world. They're engaged in things like disintermediating the bank and funding their own lives through crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending. So within that context, people don't really see themselves in that clear delineation. And in fact, many of the sort of new bottom-up models, what we call new power models that are emerging, don't really have those delineations in the same way. You have people who are exercising, no doubt, strategy, who are playing coordination roles, but in, say, a movement like the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, you actually see many leaders. You don't see one kind of heroic figure who's there to dispense inspiration to the followers, and we don't then evaluate the leader based on that. Really what we do now, I think, is the new leadership capability is how well you can steward the crowd, how well you can really manage one of these bases, rather than, you're the leader and they're the followers.
So with that in mind, climate change has been one of the big issues that we've discussed here the last couple of days. What's your message for the performance theatre community on how we can really mobilise and activate around climate change?
Well, I think we have to move beyond the comfortable. And so I think there were great discussions about climate, but I'm not sure that there was always a delineation between what felt safe, our commitment to sustainability, the need to address climate, and the sort of moments at which that becomes a bit more uncomfortable. And so specifically, I think that we need the wonderful members of this community to kind of use their voice more loudly, more clearly, more bravely on climate. This is a critical year. We're less than 6 months away from the Paris COP, and the voices of businesses, the hundreds of thousands of employees, the millions, in some cases billions of consumers represented by the people here at the Performance Theatre, we need them to really step up, because those voices are going to be very, very clear signals in the coming months. And so I feel like there's a lot of encouraging words. I think it's easy for people to sign up to principles. It's easy to have people sign up to communiques. The question is, how are they using their political voice? Is there an alignment between the rhetoric and the lobbying, for example? Is there an alignment between the rhetoric and the core business? And how do we get that closer? I also made the point that I think we need to do a better job of aligning what is already an incredible civil society movement and effort around climate in the lead up to Paris and what business could do. And if we could get that integration tighter, and if we could really coordinate at some of the big moments, we could send a really strong signal that we need a more ambitious deal than decarbonisation this century, it's great that we're now talking about a world that has net zero emissions. That's wonderful. But the critical question for the future of the planet and for our species is by when? And so, most scientific consensus, the overwhelming scientific consensus, is that really we need to do that decarbonisation by mid-century. And that's actually the kind of crucible of a lot of these conversations.
So we've heard from some great people over the last couple of days. What, in your mind, makes a great leader?
Well, I think someone who can create and manage the disequilibrium that is required to make big change. And that's what I was saying earlier about the sort of discomfort. If there's no discomfort, there's probably not a lot of adaptive change. And everybody pats themselves on the back and says, terrific. You've said all the right things, and there's a vocabulary that we all use. So I think leaders create disequilibrium when, adaptive change is required, as Ron Heifetz and others have described in their work on leadership that I've been quite influenced by. So I think that's a really important frame. And then I think, the other thing to think about is today, leadership is your capacity to build an empowered crowd, and then to steward that crowd to really concrete change. And I think it's interesting, when you think about, even the most admirable hero leaders, some of like a Malala, she's going to need a crowd. She's going to need a constituency of millions, tens of millions of women and girls if her work is going to go beyond the sort of short-term impact of her incredible story. And that also goes for wonderful CEOs like Paul Pullman. They're going to need constituencies within their own companies, and the true test of their ability to be transformational figures will be, do lots of other CEOs follow? Or do those other CEOs go, he's got that, right? And that to me is like where the rubber hits the road.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeremy, and look, congratulations again on your ILA 2015.
So honoured, and thank you so much, Jeremy.